maybe the first thing I want to do to introduce the panel is to talk a little bit about this migration of independent ideas and independent cinema from movies onto the smaller screen. And I think the first question I'd want to throw out to the panel is, why do you think this is happening? It's reasonably new, and I think it seems like it's something that people are responding to, but is there a trend, is there a reason that we're starting to see this migration happen now? Marguerite?
I think that it's very much about a recognizable brand and building upon a pre-existing audience. It's about amortizing a property that you've gone to great expense to create, and if you can get additional revenue out of it, so much the better. It's a way to extend careers as well. So I think, revenue is obviously going to be the primary motivator, revenue and brand and international recognition.
And do you think is there a perception that it's harder and harder to get your feature film financed, and that this is a way to continue working as a storyteller?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just a perception. I mean, I think it's really true. I think it is harder and harder to get your feature film financed. And I know that one of the things that you intend for us to talk about is, just because you can't finance it as a film, is it such a bright idea to try to do it as a television series? In some cases, yes. In some cases, no. Yeah. But absolutely, the paucity of financing on the feature film side would be another reason why there are some refugees, which is too bad, because television shouldn't be made by refugees. It should be made by people who truly love television.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things just leading up to this panel, I was doing a bit of research, and in the last couple of weeks, there's been a number of things that have been greenlit for television, one of which was kind of interesting to me, was the old movie Heathers, which has been greenlit as a television series, and I thought, okay, that's kind of strange. Why that series of all things that wasn't a brand title? But obviously there's some resonance with that brand that's being greenlit now. The other one that was also interesting to me was The Good Shepherd, which is now being undertaken as a TV series from Showtime, and I'm just going to read you the clipping of the press release. Is developing The Good Shepherd, a period drama based on the characters from the 2006 Cold War feature spy thriller. Producers originally planned to do a Good Shepherd feature sequel, but opted to pursue pay cable for an opportunity to delve deeper into the characters in a serialized format. Now, who knows what this is going to turn out to be, but do you think how translatable are those opportunities? Do you need to be in the right kind of hands? I mean, Fraser, you've...
in terms of how those specifically will translate?
Yeah, I mean, you've got a very closed story that's 2 hours long, and then serialized storytelling with those characters.
I think it goes to the talk of who you're pitching it to and where you're trying to take it to, and knowing where you're bringing it to, and you really have to come equipped. First of all, knowing the network. When I was at NBC Universal internationally, we were interested in very episodic television. We weren't interested in big serial arcs. We didn't want something that was going to spread across lots of, where the viewer had to be there for every episode. We wanted really accessible television. So when we had pitches for movie properties that were showing up, a lot of them were based on, these ongoing stories. The Good Shepherd, for instance, wouldn't have been appropriate at all. Mm-hmm. That, however, doesn't necessarily stop people from churning up with those sorts of pitches. And I think it's really important for people who have worked in cinema and film to be able to, identify exactly who they're targeting, and not assume that because they're coming out of cinema and with a name brand that is recognizable, that we're all going to want to jump all over it, regardless of what channels we represent. And I think that's a really important piece of homework that has to be done first. And it used to surprise me how often it wasn't always done. You would often get things showing up and it's like, well, this is going to translate into something that isn't a fit for us at all. Why are you here? So, but the assumption is, we come out of cinema, we come out of cinema with this, you're going to be really excited, and, it comes with trumpets blaring, and here we go, and we're seeing everybody in town. Well, you still have to go through the same procedure that TV producers go through as well, where they understand who they're pitching and what they're pitching to whom.
Right, absolutely. Now, Oliver, you've recently been part of Tom Fontana's new series, Copper, which is, I think, 3 or 4 episodes in here in Canada, and it's broadcast and has been carried at BBC America in the United States. Was it really important for you that, though this was ideas that were very cinematic and had a specific point of view, but you had a strong showrunner and a vision that was attached to that project?
Probably the main reason why we got involved was actually Tom Fontana and Barry, the show running team. That was, of course, the underlying script, so you knew the story would work. I mean, it's it's not a brand that came from the theatrical world, but it resonates a little bit because it has this Gangs of New York world. Probably without Gangs of New York, no one in Europe would have known that 4 Points is an Irish riot point and all these things. So basically it was a combination of the show running team, the possibility due to the natural setting that you could integrate international cast through the immigration setting there, and at the end of a world that people could somehow still relate to. So it wasn't as special as eventually, I don't know, Western setting that might have, I mean, probably we wouldn't have done the same thing if it were Western outskirts where completely different stories would take place.
So had it been taken place in the Civil War instead of post-Civil War?
Exactly. So, I mean, it's post-Civil War, and you don't need to know too much about the Civil War. I mean, it's part of the story afterwards, but even the Civil War is relatively simple, even from a European point of view, to understand that, well, it's North, South, Lincoln, so you have a lot of elements that resonate historically that even probably even the most, or not the most sophisticated person will relate to. But at the end of the day, it was the story, but also the way you mentioned it before, it was possible to transfer this world into a serialized, half episodic world in a very convincing way, because it wasn't about the riots, at the end a police procedural with a strong arc.
Got it. Now, Julia, your company has made a very successful transition from being a wonderful and renowned feature film producer to now television. Do you find the sensibilities of those worlds were lining up? Did one inform the other when you guys decided to make that move?
Well, we'd always worked in TV to a certain degree. Not better. We'd always worked in TV for a certain amount. And they're different universes. While one set of skills can certainly help and be applied, you're talking to different people, you're talking about a different way of working, a different approach altogether.
And were the expectations that you were forced to answer to your potential customer base in the television world, did you feel prepared to do that, or did you feel that it was beneficial for you to bring in someone who had some expertise there, or how did you manage that?
Are you saying, do we need to bring in other people?
Yeah. Would you recommend to most people to make a partnership perhaps with someone who had done that?
Well, I think whether it's feature film or it's TV, it's always about the team and filling in one another's holes, so to speak. So yeah, totally. I think part of being a producer is building a team to make whatever it is you're endeavoring to make as good as it can be.
And so some of the things that we look at when we think about shows like Girls or Copper or my new favorite show, Boss, which has Gus Van Sant attached to it, that Marguerite's channel runs, they tend to come from a very specific mindset, and it's very much like independent film in that they're writer-driven.
Kind of authored.
Yeah, very much authored. And Marguerite, when you are getting pitches for shows for your channel, is that the thing that will put you over the edge in support, or is it a director or cast member?
First of all, we're not getting that many pitches just yet. I mean, doing dramatic series is something that we're ramping up to. But, what's going to be most important to me is the controlling story idea of the series first and foremost. Does that idea have legs? Does it have an audience? Does it have a concept with a hook? We were talking about the importance of brands internationally. If people who are coming to us can't afford to come with a brand, have they come with an idea that is so standout that's really attractive? That, for me, is consideration number one. Is it something that our subscribers are going to really perceive value, for getting? Then beyond that, of course, it's can the team accomplish it, and does the team rock? Right. So that, because we're pay. And it's, premium pay, all of that. Authorial voice, for me, is very important, just as it is in feature film. And so it's not hugely surprising that the first dramatic series that I triggered for Super Channel is with Tom Fitzgerald. And it'll be his first dramatic series. And so, then in a situation like that, the thing is to make sure that if someone is coming in from feature film, that they are absolutely surrounded. Julia's totally right. It's a different world. It walks and talks differently. And so they need to be surrounded by people who really know and understand that world.
Right. Okay.
So and it walks and talks differently in every way, production, creatively, and financially.
Sure. Now, Stephanie, can you tell me a little bit from your perspective? It's easy for us to talk about independent filmmakers and moving into television, but is there a big difference between something that when you look at it, you know, this should really be a TV movie and it should never have, you know, it doesn't really have that authorial voice to it, but it still has value and it might be,
Yeah,
you know?
well, I think that's what I look for. Actually, I've been attending the Sundance Film Festival, and, you know, there are some movies that are, they're just, they're broad enough, and they're produced at a relatively small scale. The independent film market is so competitive, you know, I mean, the industry right now is so competitive, but I think I've always been in the television business, but I'm so impressed with any kind of, you know, independent feature theatrical that can go worldwide, because it's very difficult. So some of these limited theatricals, they've got to, you know, if they you know, nice romantic comedy with a decent cast, it'll maybe sit much better with a television distribution company that can market it as a television movie. We just find that there can be more revenue there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the number of opportunities, maybe the panel can think about the number of opportunities, those channels that are looking for these sort of specific authorial voice kinds of shows. I mean, are they increasing? Are they diminishing? How hard is it? I mean, in Canada, we don't really have a true kind of cable channel that looks for that the way that FX would, for instance, with Justified and some other shows that I know we can list. But when you're trying to put something like that together, what's the likelihood of you getting something off the ground, and is it worth that kind of focus for you? I mean, I know only each individual could make that choice, but how do you determine which screen is more appropriate for your project?
I think that at the outset, there's so many things that need to be determined. What sort of show is it? Is it an episodic show? Is it a serialized show? If it's cable, is there a home for it in Canada? And if there's a home for it in Canada, is there a home for it in the U.S., or are there partners in Europe that might be interested, that they can find common ground? I think the TV world has opened up exponentially in the last several years. America is now looking at us to work with. European co-productions used to be primarily for feature films. Now they're for television series as well. So the possibilities of finding ways to make things work is way better. But knowing what it is you want to make and what kind of show it is, I think, step number one, because until you know that, you don't know who to approach.
Right. So I think that sort of leads me into kind of the next bunch of this conversation is, from a creative perspective, what are the advantages storytelling-wise, and how do you, you know, if you're a filmmaker who's got a story, how do you determine what, other than just defining, is it episodic, how do I do it? What is it about it that you think you want to make the goal for? I mean, maybe Oliver, how do you know when you spot something?
Well, I mean, just technically the possibility of eventually laying out a character or story arc over 10 hours gives you completely different possibilities to go deep into the characters, include certain elements that would be very difficult to do in a 2-hour movie or a 2.5-hour movie. So creatively, that's probably also the interesting thing that drives a lot of showrunners to give it a try in serialized drama in television, even though it used to be looked down upon from the theatrical world, that you actually have more creative possibilities to work on these characters and make it an appealing show. But as you said before, it's just not every creative person is able to do that, because the necessity from a theatrical movie just creatively are different from what the audience expects, and depending which channel you cater to. If it's a paid channel, it's a different ballgame than something that has commercial breaks. Then you have to live with that, because if you have commercial breaks, you can't expect to set up a story for 60 minutes and expect the people to recall it after seeing whatever. 50.
So when you look at a project, and Fraser, when you used to look at a project, do you think just 10 episodes out, or are you thinking, where am I going to be in season 3? And would you say the same, Stephanie?
Yeah.
Returnability is really important, I think, for almost anybody's model. I mean, it's interesting being in the UK now and seeing that a lot of shows do get commissioned for the BBC that are not returnable, and that's very much their model. But I think most other places, you want to know that you can pull some returnability, because everyone's, if it's successful, you're going to want more. The distributor's going to want more, the platform's going to want more, the viewer's going to want more, and you have to be ready to accommodate that.
Yeah, I think that's the first question that the network will ask is, how does this expand to 5 seasons?
Sure.
Yeah.
Now, I guess just on that point, when we're thinking about event television and an independent voice, I guess we should also maybe touch on miniseries, because they can often be something like Todd Haynes moving into television when he's doing Mildred Pierce, and which would never have been made without Kate Winslet's participation. But there are opportunities perhaps for a smaller flight series that are very auteur driven. I mean, Oliver, do you see a lot of those presented?
Well, I mean, Europe has a particular situation because miniseries or signature miniseries, event miniseries still have quite a meaning for the big broadcasters. In comparison, they kind of vanquished in North America. So you have every large channel has 2, 3, 4 events a year that, depending on the topic, could eventually go a little bit in the theatrical direction or are just signature miniseries. There's also in Germany, we have this particular situation where 120 movie versions are done because people are afraid, or broadcasters are afraid of 2 nights. So it's just basically an extended 3-hour movie that is also a challenge creatively because it's often stretched out. But in Europe, you have a very particular situation because, for example, in Germany, you have so-called hybrid projects. Downfall was actually shot as a miniseries and was theatrically released afterwards. So, and you have a couple of things in that direction. So in Europe, anyhow, the difference or the wall between feature films, independent feature film, and television isn't that high as in LA, where people look probably down upon it. Apart from but there is definitely internationally a tendency of limited series in the sense of 8 hours, 6 hours, that there is more openness to consider that. But on the other hand, you always have to keep in mind, just to give an example, the risk for the broadcaster is higher if something is not working on a very highly serialized level. That's why, for example, we have a couple of examples where, for example, Games of Thrones or Walking Dead was aired in one block in one weekend. In Germany, for example.
Because it started out with 5 episodes.
Yeah,
right?
because even Games of Thrones, you do 2 or 3 episodes a night and simulate this DVD viewing pattern rather than doing it weekly. Of course, that could build up this enormous success, but the risk was evaluated as too high. So actually, with Tom Fontana's Borgia, it was the same thing. It was aired in prime time within 7 days. So you create the event. At the end of the day, it's the same thing like a miniseries. You recreate a maxi miniseries over a certain period. So for Europe, definitely, to go back to the miniseries, that there are probably more possibilities to work with minis or a mixed setup with that than eventually in some North American broadcasters who are a little bit more hesitant about that.
Yes. Now, Julia, I know your company's done a couple of minis. I think it was Diamonds and Whiskey Echo. Was it Whiskey Echo?
No, just
Diamonds. Just Diamonds. Yeah. So did you find that it was, and it was a natural move for you to get into that and more serialized drama? And you're also working on a very, very large international co-production right now, aren't you?
Yeah, Heretics. It's called Heretics, which has had a little journey of its own. We're now working together.
We did it.
Did that happen here at Strategic?
No.
No. It's a 10-hour period piece, serialized, for TMN, Chorus, and Shaw, has second window in Canada, and Arte in France. And we were actually in pre-production in August, setting up building our sets and so on in Romania, but we lost one of our partners.
Oh.
So we had to shut it down, and we've now found another partner. And we're shooting it in Ireland early next year.
And are you imagining that as a miniseries, or is it potentially
It's
a limited
10
series?
hours,
Yes.
and to be determined as to whether or not it can come back. It can come back,
Yes.
but it needn't.
It needn't.
Yeah.
So it's a satisfying conclusion. And was that something you
Hopefully.
consciously did when you were working with your partners to craft the creative material?
Well, this was also broadcaster driven. We actually felt that creatively it really did call for many more episodes. That we're cramming actual history into a much more truncated period of time, which when making character driven material is a real challenge. So that was just one of the editorial challenges we've had in making this or developing it. But basically, I think we will have pulled it off, and everybody will let us know, I'm sure. But at the end of this 10 episodes, determined by the broadcaster, if it comes back, it will be the next period of time. We were not successful in sort of.
So you're not renewing the characterizations?
Who will live and who will die is.
Don't tell me. Don't tell me. I want to say.
When you're putting something together, like I said earlier, having that option, whatever that option may be for returnability, is really important, especially in a co-production environment where you are going to have, you could have partners from anywhere, and they've all got different expectations. Most of them will be hoping that if it goes, there'll be more. Very few, if you're in a single commission kind of situation, then you can obviously work to the needs of that single commissioner, but increasingly there's less and less of that, and there's more people sharing the load, and inevitably there's going to be somebody there who is investing in it because they want to see that they're hoping for long-term success, not just one season's worth. So always having that kind of, always having that idea in mind for returnability is, whatever the solution might be is always a good idea, even if it's in your back pocket.
Right. Now, in some of the earlier examples, like Good Shepherd and Heathers, and I'm thinking particularly about miniseries like Pillars of the Earth or now World Without End, they were very there was already a brand awareness that's built in. If you're planning to move into television and it's not a network kind of show that you're planning, is it really an enhancement or is it necessary to do that? Do you need that to get through the door?
It certainly
helps.
It helps a lot, yeah. In fact, because the show that we're working on now, for North American tastes, it's pretty obscure. Nobody knows about the Cathars in the south of France in the 12th century, it's just,
yes.
So that we have to find other ways to give marketing elements to the networks.
And what kind of process did you have? How long has your process been?
It's been over 3 years.
Over 3 years.
In fact,
I remember. I was trying not to think about how long it's been.
Diane was at TMN when we went into development.
But it does take a long time, and I guess maybe just speaking about the creative as you're moving an independent voice through, is there a difference between independent film and independent television in terms of the level of integrity that you get to keep with that voice? Is that something, Marguerite, that, because you've worked in feature film for quite some time before you went to the dark side and became a broadcaster, but is there a big difference in the levels of control, or even though you might get something into development or eventually greenlit, that collaborative process, what's that like?
There is a difference in degrees of control. When working with people on the feature film side, which I do still do, and someone actually said to me a while ago, "Oh, Marguerite, I hear you're working in television."
Oh dear.
Thanks. Anyway, on the feature film side, it's very much like, look, best idea wins, and even though our company has the money or whatever, it's yours. This isn't about the money. This is best idea wins. And all I need is for you to engage with me in the argument. And either you persuade me or I persuade you, but we will argue this point. And that's always really stimulating. I think that, it's really an important thing for filmmakers to have a solid sounding board to bounce ideas off of, someone who's an ombudsman for the audience. And that should be the producer, but, and of course it is the producer, it's sometimes also the distributor or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's all about collaboration. And at the end of the day, when I will agree to disagree with the filmmaker if no one wins the argument, and then she gets to make that film her way.
Right.
But as long as she's argued with me in good faith. On the television side, having that kind of discussion, and I'm using experience that I've had with networks at this point, not Super Channel.
Yes.
Having that discussion is a little bit of a nicety. At the end of the day, fact is, the broadcaster needs to get what the broadcaster needs to get. And hopefully they won't have signed on to your project if you guys don't want to make the same project as an end result. But at the end of the day, the broadcaster has a great deal more control. With Super Channel, it is kind of different because we are working with authorial voice. And so I will, still in some circumstances, depending on who I'm working with, if that voice is there, I will argue with the voice, if just like in feature film.
Yes.
But if it's a different kind of series, then it is a more top-down style of creative management.
Got it. Now, Stephanie, when you're looking at projects and you're looking at collaborators, you guys are working all over the world. How do you manage the expectations of different partners? How do you work that through?
Well, again, we're a very market-driven, commercial, independent production company. So, we're pretty strict in, we'll work with different independent filmmakers, but there's, very specific genres that we invest in to produce, because we know that we have deals all over the world for a certain type of genre movie, which is a female protagonist thriller, disaster movie, or Christmas movie with animals. So basically, what I say to these particular writers and filmmakers is that, you can be passionate about what sells. And some of these, thrillers are great, and they just, they're small screen thrillers, but they get these movies made, and they make them really well, and they make them great. Or the collision course plane crash movie can have some real dramatic elements to it that that a filmmaker can be proud about. So I think that's really what we look at, as people that that they have a sense for they want to make something good, and they want it to to really to be in production, and maybe not win the Academy Award or potentially an Emmy, but that's I think what we do. And then also, I suppose if you talk about production in other parts of the world, it's if they can bring some interesting financing to the table.
Sure.
So.
Well, and I think as more and more, my sense is as more and more people, whether you're doing an independent cinema versus the studio system, or whether it's independent television versus the television studio system, there tends to be, you've got to collaborate, and the world is getting smaller.
Yeah. Well, and I think, about the whole TV movie business for independents, it is where we can be competitive with the studios and have these, volume deals, because the studios, I think Sony a little bit is, still making TV movies, but now that, if the broadcasters are still, hopefully it continues that, they still would like to have original television movies on cable channels and networks internationally. It's, it's a nice line of business for independent companies.
Now, Fraser, do you think this is a question for producers and writers and creatives? Is this a timing question as to where they are in their career path, as to what kind of television they make? And David Chase didn't make Sopranos. That wasn't the first project he made, and he started out in a lot of writers' rooms for network television long before he got there, as an example.
Yeah. I think you can, at any point in your career, if you are, if you know how to tell a good story, that's the first thing. And, whether you're someone like Lena Dunham, who's gone on out of cinema to television fairly quickly, from one feature and some internet work to having her own show, to someone like Martin Scorsese, who's been around cinema for ages and is a very accomplished storyteller, obviously, and has moved on to Boardwalk Empire. I think the first question is, it's going to go back to the work, and if that's what broadcasters are going to look at. What is the work? Yes, it does help to have a good resume, for sure. But it really helps, I think, more than anything, whether you're Martin Scorsese or the person who just made a monster movie, that you as we were saying, you understand who you're sending it to, you understand how that story can translate to the world of television, and that you surround yourself with people who can steward you along the way. And that's ultimately always going to be the most, I think that combination of things is the most important part.
Sure.
Experience is always great, but we work with new people, all of us. We work with experienced people all the time, whether they're in television or film.
Absolutely. Now, can you maybe talk a little bit about Parade's End, which is a bit of an interesting anomaly?
Yeah, sure. Parade's End is a program that Look at Point, the company I work with, has co-produced, that is on BBC Two at the moment. It's a 6-part adaptation of a Maddox Ford novel, or actually a series of novels, set against the backdrop of the First World War, before, during, and after. And is playing out in 6 parts on BBC right now, and is moving on to HBO. it's a challenging work. I think it offers a lot of the immediate appeal of the current costume craze that Downton Abbey has managed to kick off, but once you get into Parade's End, it's a very different show. And no, it's not returnable because the novels ended, and I won't get into how, but yeah, it is what it is.
And who's the team on that show?
And so the team on that show is in particular, it's written by Tom Stoppard, and who has done a lot of cinema, obviously, a lot of theater as well. And so, coming out of a film world, most recently, and getting involved in that. But the trick behind it was that right away Mammoth Screen got involved, and they're a television production company in the UK, and Tom Stoppard and his creative producer got involved with Mammoth on the show, and Lookout Point joined in to help with the packaging and the arrangement and some creative elements as far as brands and where it goes and who goes where. But allying themselves with Mammoth, who really understand how television works. They've got the relationships with the broadcasters, and they've got the creative instincts for television. That really helped that show become a television show and stay away from just being a really long movie, basically. Right. That being said, it can be packaged in a lot of different ways. They're selling it as, I think, three 90-minute movies and some other permutations. But and when it goes on HBO later in the year, it'll be interesting to see how it plays there as a 6-part series, which would be very much considered, I guess, still a miniseries in HBO's definition of things. Yeah. But ultimately, having working with someone like Tom Stoppard, you sort of as a broadcaster, certainly, I would immediately start thinking, okay, this is someone who's used to a very specific style of working, a particular style of media or concept, and so the reassurance of having the Mammoth aboard is I think a major reason why that program was able to move ahead.
Great. And I haven't seen it yet. I'm looking forward to that, but at some point in time, I guess the decision is made is that it works better over these numbers of hours, and that is the in-depth storytelling that they talk about in the article on Good Shepherd. Right. That they have the opportunity to do. And do you happen to know if the novel came first, or did Tom Stoppard come on board? How that worked out? I have to admit, I don't know what the order was. I mean, the novels. The novels are really old. Probably 70 plus years old at this point, 60 years, but. I'm not entirely sure whether it was the producer went to but it did originate out of Tom Stoppard's creative producer, which is where it came from originally. Whether she had him lined up, I'm not entirely certain. Right. Well, you sort of have to think that maybe it was something he was invested. He certainly was passionate about it, and whether he thought it up or not, it was something he became very impassioned about, and was entirely focused on, and did a great job. It's a great show. Yeah, great. I'm looking forward to seeing it. Now, Oliver, when you were working with Barry Levinson and Tom Stoppard's company on the Borgia project. Yeah. How did Copper come to you?
Tom Fontana was working on. I mean, the project was floating around for quite some time. We knew about it, and actually, it only got some momentum when BBC America came on board. In, let's say, an ambition of trying to repeat the success of AMC and other cable networks, of redefining itself as a home of original drama. And then it was, of course, also connected to financing. That from that point, it became reasonable to consider the realization of the project. So, but I mean, that's a relatively, because of course Tom Fontana comes from the television world and it has a certain sensibility. So it's not necessarily, it's more the world or the idea that might have some relationship to the theatrical world. The team itself is very television driven, but we have it very often in Europe that highly acclaimed theatrical people try to get into the television world, and it very often doesn't work. Because just as you said, the sensibility of trying to do art house television is often not working out. So this kind of window that we're in right now, where we have a lot of channels globally, a number of channels globally who are looking for this distinguished original content to brand them the way that AMC and now BBC America has done. Do you think over time that that's a window that's going to disappear or diminish, or is this going to be something that there's going to be a perpetual appetite for them to do that? Well, I mean, as it seems, at least, I'm not always sure if, as an economic endeavor, it makes sense or not. But of course, for these channels and trying to get more distribution, especially at the starting point, it's a big incentive, independent of the rating success, to create a reason for the platforms, for the cable networks, and also for the audience to put yourself on the map.
Yes.
I mean, of course, you have to see, is it worthwhile spending, I don't know, a certain high amount per episode to get 1, 2, 3 million viewers? That's always the question. What value do you? But on the other hand, it seems to be that it puts certain broadcasters on the map, and we observe you have a huge number of, or a large number of new players in the U.S. markets that never used to do drama. Also thinking of Netflix or someone like that, who is substantially investing in drama. So there are definitely more opportunities. If that goes away or not is probably on the long run an economic question. It has to work out as a whole for the channel. If maybe the show doesn't. I mean, there are a couple of signature shows that don't travel very well internationally.
Now, can you sort of describe examples of that?
Even if you take a great show like Boss or even Mad Men. I mean, they are great shows, but they are very niche. They will never get an audience or a wide success the same way certain other shows might get from the network level as well as. So the smaller the niches, the more art house it becomes. It might get all the Emmys, all the critical acclaim. The question, it only just caters to niche audiences, and that's a little bit the tricky part of it, as you don't always have the same representation of network systems in different countries. So you might have situations where it's unsellable because there's not a channel with any similar slot to that. So it might be a DVD phenomena, but good luck in finding the home in an essential territory.
So something like a Breaking Bad or Mad Men that have really branded AMC, but both of those shows are coming to the end of their cycle. They've been imagined for a very short number of episodes, short number of seasons, and
it might be interesting to see, and maybe people know this, but like what's the ad revenue increase at AMC now that they've had those incredibly successful shows? It might make up for the fact that
exactly. I mean, it might, as an overall factor, make the difference. I mean, I'm relatively sure it makes a difference.
Well, and yet a show like Walking Dead, which is a more popular show by a very sizable margin in terms of ratings and attention. It's a genre show, and it's also put them on the map, and it'll be interesting to see how they balance that business plan and whether or not some of those more complicated, nuanced, character-driven versus plot-driven things, whether or not they sustain themselves or whether this is a very short window.
Right, but I'm sure they have a lot of talent now. Looking at,
and Walking Dead is one of these examples. Probably if you would have pitched someone 5 years ago, let's do a ongoing series on zombies for cable, everyone would.
It's true. That's why it's such an exciting time, because really now anything is possible, and while it continues to evolve, nobody really knows where it's going to end up. But there's so much more, I would say, talent being used on TV now, and more adventurous activity by programmers. It's a great time, and this is converging with the lack of screens in the theatrical world. So a lot of people, I think, are prepared to move over and are finding the benefits of going into this world.
Well, and it may turn out to be that the AMCs and the cable channels are supplanted by the Netflixes and the Hulus and even Xbox and Google TV and all those other things. They may sort of come up the middle, and niche is not necessarily their issue.
I mean, who would have thought 10 years ago that network television in the U.S. would be coming to Canadian producers to work together? It would have been one of those things that you would say, never, that will never happen, and it is now.
Yes, so it happened to me when I was a broadcaster, and then I woke up. That was it. It's like never going to happen. Never had that possibility. That's true. So in terms of the creative, I think we've sort of given people an outline of what the kind of storytelling is that tends to migrate independently. Can we talk maybe a little bit about what the challenges or the benefits are about putting the money together to get these things to happen? Very often, some of the examples we've used, for instance, are period pieces, which tend to be a little bit more expensive, smaller number of episodes, your amortization costs are higher. Does the one thing impact on the other inevitably? Have you found that, Fraser?
It's sort of, oh, sorry. You get, oh, sorry, can you just repeat that altogether? I got my mind jumbled.
My mind jumbled, that's
Yeah.
okay. It's the coffee, we should have
I
gone
was
with
thinking,
it. But, no, I was just going to say that, when you're trying to put the creative together and the financing together.
Right.
Does the one influence the other because of how you have to put the money together to make it happen? Is it more expensive because you've got either something that's big and epic as an event?
oh, absolutely, yeah, sorry. And yes, you can. I mean, the thing is, if you're being pitched something that has a big brand attached to it, especially coming out of a known brand, or you're pitching something with a big name attached to it, then yes, of course, suddenly it does become more expensive. That's sort of a natural thing. It comes in a lot more money. I mean, a lot of these shows that have come in that were being pitched around that were based on existing brands were coming in with really big price tags that were quite frightening when we were on the international side. It was like, wow, like $4 million sometimes per episode, that kind of thing total.
That's
like,
crazy.
how do we,
Yeah.
where I was working at the time, that was just not a number we could play with, but it was coming with so much prestige attached to it, and the assumption that everyone's going to jump all over that because of that factor. So I think that has to be, it's always going to influence the price depending on who is there or what is there. And it's also a decision, that being said, as a broadcaster, we would also always look at what that show was as well. And okay, so it's got a prestigious person, it's got a prestigious thing, it's got a big price tag, but hang on a second, is this a show? Would this ever be a show? I mean, at one point, we spent a lot of time at NBC looking through, when we were getting more into co-production on the international side, we went through the existing catalog of Universal properties that would potentially be available to us if we wanted to initiate something ourselves. And like huge list of movies of, every description. And, you go through these catalogs and you realize how many are just in the Universal catalog alone. And we went through it, and it was just, the number of times I went through and said, well, actually that wouldn't, oh, great, that's, well, you know what, think about it. How can we parse this out? Who do we get? How would it work? Do we bring that person back? Well, do we, And the list was actually startlingly short by the time we were done with what we thought could actually work. So I think it's always going to come down to what is the show, and obviously joy of the money, but what is that show? And the attachments can raise the price, but sometimes it's not going to be worth it, even if you've got all these big players or whatever attached.
Marquee cast and whatever it is.
Yeah, but if the program isn't there, the program's not there, and that's still the decision that has to be made, I think.
Got it. Stephanie, as in the acquisitions world that you're in now, are you finding that it's easier to make decisions about getting stuff financed? Is it harder to get stuff financed? I mean, are the stakes as high as they've always been, or are they higher with all of these digital players invading the marketplace?
Let's see. Well, we are starting to focus on drama series production, and I think that's very difficult to get financed. But for a company like ours, we, most of our development resources and staff are focused on development of TV movies. So as far as series, we really know that we have to invest in underlying material, book rights, maybe remakes, and hopefully make some good relationships with talented television writers that have some credits and invest a bit in that. But we're just very true to our plan, and if somebody has a good script, and I can sort of calculate what I could, the sales team can bring in internationally on it, because we have models that show us, then that's basically my finance plan, with potentially the U.S. being, the wild card, the U.S. and Canada. So if somebody is looking for, $1 million, I have pretty realistic, conversations with them about what the market will bear, because we're talking about the television world with hopefully some upside in digital VOD, DVD distribution. So it's it's an interesting business, because there's a decent margin. It's not great, but whereas in the feature film production world, it seems like it's kind of like Vegas odds. I mean, you can put a lot into it and then not make anything, or make a killing. So, I think, as far as green lighting something, if it fits into, sort of our overall distribution model, then, I know how much money that I have to play with. But yeah, I guess it's difficult as, different markets struggle, and, we're still in an economic crisis worldwide, and certainly, we're losing, big broadcast clients in, pretty major territories, so.
And do you contemplate, do any of you really always, when you're developing properties, do you think about the digital applications? Is that really meaningful? I know in Canada we've got various obligations with the CMF that are good, and they're building up businesses and expertise and creativity in those areas. But if you've got that, does that really help your property? Does it really make a difference if you're going in with a property that, is maybe a big miniseries and it's got an elaborate website with a game component, an online game or something?
Just from we've been involved in quite a lot of projects that sometimes came along with a big package. It's a nice have, but it's economically, I don't think it makes you wouldn't be able to ask for more money because
Right.
you're coming with this package. I mean, they take it, okay, I'll take some elements for their website or something like that, but it's economically neutral at the end of the day. Of course, if you, in the kids' world, it's different if you
Yes.
can prove that I don't know, you have this following, or if it's a property that already exists then you could build it theoretically. But if it's basically the show, and even if you have the best possible gaming platform package, if the show doesn't work for a channel, he won't buy it just because you have this wonderful package alongside.
Right.
And if the show works for the channel, he will also live with the fact of eventually not having that package.
So I'm not going to get my copper shoot 'em up game show.
No. Well,
Copper.
I mean, there's actually a Facebook game, but it's just for example, we didn't invest in that because it felt like, okay, it's a nice add-on, but it wasn't like necessarily the decisive element. It was more important. And it's always the tricky thing with talking about all these brands. I wouldn't rely too much on brands because there are a lot of examples where probably the creative team relied on the brand and they went along and maybe the results were a little bit mixed. And because the brand might help you in the promotion at first stage, you get people to watch it, but if the show doesn't work, you can have as much
matter.
brand as you. So then rather have a world that people are familiar with. Don't spend money on the brand and create that. I mean, it really depends on the property.
And would you look at a writer like a Tom Fontana or a David Milch or Matthew Weiner or someone? Do they also come with a kind of a brand that goes with them in a cachet?
To be very frank, rather towards the professional executives.
Okay.
It's not that you could promote. Probably you could promote Tom Fontana to the final audience in North America. You wouldn't be able to really do that. You could say from the producer of Borgia in this context.
Yes.
There, depending on the territories, you could do something. But for example, it's very simple. Oz hasn't traveled very well, so even though Oz is great, just people wouldn't know about it. So.
It's true, but interestingly, it does give the broadcasters
Yeah.
kind of security, whether it's a false one or
Yeah.
not,
Yes.
is a question. But going in, having a Tom Fontana attached is really helpful.
And in a way, it's also it's an incentive from an international perspective. There's always the point: why should I consider a co-production pre-acquisition at an early stage and not wait until it's finished? So reasons are: one, you can work with someone you would normally not get for your territory or whatever, or the whole project wouldn't be made without you being on board very early on.
Yeah.
If it seems like it's a commercial show that will be made anyway,
Then you might wait.
yeah, you might just wait and see if it works. So
Sure.
that's.
Just thinking about the digital side again quickly, the other challenge we used to have with digital attachments when you're looking at especially a series of channels, when you're buying for a series of channels or you're buying internationally at all, is management of the digital assets. When you have a program, you buy it and you play it, and depending, maybe it aired maybe it originated in Canada and the U.S., it played there first, maybe months beforehand. You definitely have risks in terms of piracy and stuff, but you deal with it and you go forward. When there's an online platform thing, especially something that is really meant to be highly interactive and ongoing, you wind up with a huge management challenge in terms of that stuff not getting burned out too quickly by the North American audience, and moreover, who's managing that when it gets into who's managing that when it comes time for the program to play in Hungary 7 months later. That interactivity is great for the viewer who is watching the first run and is getting live tweets from characters or doing, there's whatever it is, there's something that's ongoing, needs managing. It can start to, that plan doesn't always pay off that well down the line when, and because communities of people who are really interested in gaming and in online content communicate really, really closely with each other. That stuff has usually sort of been burned out, if anything, and isn't really of much use to the program when it plays on another platform, in its first run, but another platform down the line from its worldwide first run. So it's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Maureen?
For us domestically, on the digital side, Super Channel, because we're a subscriber-driven network, we're all about building the subscriber base. And certainly we're looking at the digital components that attach to the shows that we're triggering as being things that help us to push our marketing well beyond the subscriber base, to other communities online, and to hopefully draw those people into Super Channel. So we find that there's a low-cost reach there in terms of awareness of our network that wouldn't otherwise be available to us. So for us, there is some benefit there.
So when you have a property that, in addition to it has a Tom Fontana or a David Milch or someone else attached to it, do you use that as outreach? Is that a brand important for you?
First, I would kill for that. We don't on the original programming side. I think you're quite right. That's not, the name is not something that you market to people. You would say from the producer of.
Right.
But you wouldn't know. I don't think your average bear would really know David Milch or whatever.
Couldn't care less.
We're all about your average bear.
The average bear is good.
You actually see it even with the big US networks. They always say from the producers of Iron Man, and I mean there's a lot of migration especially even in network television, of people from very commercial movies, whatever they do at the show at the end of the day, but at least on paper they are support J.J. Abrams, all these names, Bruckheimer. But it's of course it's name dropping. Well, the final value to the final audience really depends. I mean, probably Bruckheimer people know, but
yeah, we have a Spielberg show, so that's a name that we find has some legs.
Yep, I can imagine.
Yeah. You see a lot of the same thing with a lot more these days with pitches related to gaming, too. Pitches that come out of successful video game properties, where there's an assumption that there is going to be tons and tons of value with this new TV show based on this super popular game. And there is a lot of value to that gaming community, which is huge, but it's not as huge as the audiences most of us are trying to reach. Right. It's always going to be a portion, and it becomes really difficult to sort of justify, in the end you end up doing a lot of research into how popular this game or that game is, and it starts to become very difficult to justify to yourself for broadcast adapting a gaming concept that is going to, you do the math and it's like, wow, that's a lot of people, but frankly, because it's gaming, a lot of them aren't actually watching broadcast television, and they're probably going to be seeing it through another means, and if you're not monetizing that, or your client isn't monetizing that, then that gaming concept is ultimately not going to have a lot of viewers, because the gamers will likely have caught it, and there's, compared to your broader audience, not necessarily as many of them anyway. So that's another, I was talking about cinema coming to television. I think it's the gaming coming to television also is like quite a popular idea right now, but it needs to be really closely investigated and really closely defended by whatever producers are coming in, that yes, this indeed is going to get a broader reach than just the people who love that game or
not
love
just
gaming.
Get it, but retain it.
Retain it, exactly.
You've got to keep it.
And be interested in it. And to see, Walking Dead coming out of comics was an interesting example of something that managed to make the leap out of fandom. And Game of Thrones too, for that matter.
Yes.
These came from other sources, the coming out of comics and being that successful is kind of amazing that they did that.
Well, and it's interesting to see what HBO is doing when they've got Game of Thrones, which is a monster rating hit for them, And it's a very expensive show, it looks very expensive, it's beautifully done, and it's a massive, massive hit, quite a phenomenon. At the same time, they use that popularity to lever the smaller things like Girls and Lena Dunham's career, where, you know, she might be getting 500,000 out of how many millions of subscribers, 500,000 viewers. So, but you can't do one, you throw a little balance into the system that way.
But I do wonder with just to finish up on Walking Dead as well, I look back at Frank Darabont being excused from his duties, which was a very auteur-driven approach he took, and being replaced by a television writer with more of a team approach. And I mean, it would have been amazing to be a bug on the wall of that room, because how was that decision made, and what would that show have been had he stuck around, and what was he doing specifically that was driving it, and what direction was he driving it that they felt was going to be a problem?
Well, and also, was his association a key part of them coming on board in the first place, because he came from movies?
Yeah, exactly. And then for him to, I don't know, who's to say what happened, but it's interesting to think that what the show would have looked like and how successful it would have been had he continued with his approach. Who's to say?
I just want to add, I think we're talking a lot about, you know, big name showrunners, and I think we're talking a lot about brands, and that's not always accessible to independent producers.
Yes.
But I want to, I think you make a good point when you talk about Girls and using Game of Thrones to lever an audience for Girls, and, you know, that for broadcasters, it's all about creating a portfolio of programming. So there is room for independent producers with auteur voices to come to the table, and it doesn't always have to be the Tom Fontanas of the world, the Game of Thrones of the world. In terms of brand, there is room for those little voices in there that I think will continue, because these networks, maybe not, who knows what will happen with AMC, absolutely granted. But these pay networks in particular, we really have to focus on keeping ourselves distinct from the other networks that people aren't paying an extra $15, $16 a month for. So we do have to have that portfolio of extraordinary work that's available there.
Well, and the uniqueness of that work that's not on the net,
That's
that
right.
can't be found on a network, that is very distinct and got a point of view that's relatable to your audience.
Exactly.
So, okay. Well, I think I'd like to maybe, I'm sorry, I've had my back turned to those people over here. Maybe throw it open with a few possibilities. Any questions? If anybody has any questions?
There's someone in
Yes. No.
Yeah, I just, as one of the people who's maybe migrating a little more from features to television, the serialized high-end stuff is kind of feels like a natural holy grail for filmmakers to move into TV. But what's your sense of, say, VOD as a force moving things more in the direction of serialized from episodic? Because you go around and you pick major broadcasters in Canada, they're still interested in episodic for the most part, more than you find in other places. And yet, we were here this morning and listening to the instant gratification thing, video on demand seems to lead to more binge viewing, which might be more friendly to serialized stuff. Does anyone up here have a sense of where that's going, or if that is going to continue trending that way?
Okay, let me just repeat the question for those people that couldn't have heard it. This is someone who's migrating from feature film into television and wanted to know what the real place was for high-end serialized storytelling versus what seems to be a larger appetite for episodic storytelling, and he's thrown it over to the panel for a sense of that.
The only thing I'll say is, there's VOD, and then there's streaming VOD. So if you think about Netflix, as a streaming service that's investing in production for now, I mean, that's a pay TV service. So, I think it's great that there's another player there, and so they absolutely interested in serialized because it's hopefully going to get them more subscribers. As pay TV is interested in serialized, and then for a filmmaker to be able to make that edgy, long, serialized drama, it's a good platform for that. But VOD, downloading, I would think it's probably more episodic, but
On an iTunes
because
kind
then you
of
can
model.
keep it on your phone and watch the one, but I suppose you can get also a season pass and get the whole thing. So, but that seems like it kind of comes after the television exploitation, or
I mean, sorry.
No, yeah.
We've been talking a lot about all these serialized high-end shows. I mean, probably if you, at least from a global perspective, always keep in mind that a lot of the audience is still watching normal network television, where probably the episodic is the easier one to program. So if you would if you look at it from a commercial point of view, I want to have as much money as possible to get from all the major broadcasters internationally. Probably the episodic one is a surer bet than trying, because the worst thing is if you want to do something high concept, serialized, super ambitious, and you don't deliver, then probably you can live with, you find a much better result with the episodic because it has more entry points. It's a lower risk for the broadcaster also.
Yeah.
Well, and one thing I wanted to say, just to remind everyone, it was a very stimulating conversation this morning, but in fact, TV viewership is up year over year. It is not down year over year. More people are watching television for longer hours per week, so there's a lot of channel choices, and some of those audiences seem like they're a little bit smaller, but overall, TV viewing is increasing. It's not necessarily decreasing. And I think maybe that's that multi-platform, multiple screen thing happening at the same time, but we're not dead yet, as they say.
Just a flesh wound.
Just a flesh wound. Anybody else for a question? Yes.
Yeah, it's sort of a reverse question to what you just discussed about show television and others that what's wrong with that kind of gaming element where using the show after they how many shows, or what is the biggest kind of shows that come in as serial, as series, that have potential to branch out into franchise, to add transmedia elements that knows because the storyline is, it attaches, connects to that single game audience content-wise. Is that part of the thinking? Is that common? Is that like, we don't want to go there?
Okay, let me just repeat for the audience. Her question was, it's a good one, is that is the gaming world, are television shows being looked at and designed for transmedia platforms, including growing onto gaming as opposed to games growing into television? Is that reverse happening? Is that viable? Is that interesting for people? Does anybody have an answer for that? I'm not sure I know the answer to that.
I mean, we kind of looked in quite a lot of possibilities too and analyzed the setup. I mean, honestly, the most successful series to gaming move that I know is Walking Dead. They have a very successful game that is also, let's say, respected by the gaming community as a serious game and not a stupid. I mean, leaving out the feature film stuff with Batman games or something like that turned out to be. But you always have to keep in mind that the gaming community and the television community is partly very far off. I mean, in this genre area, that's why it's so close. That's why it probably works. As soon as you go into the mainstream area, even if you would adapt a very popular game, the problem is it's so short-lived that people in 2 years, when you're finished and airing that show, might not remember that they were the biggest fan of this one game. So there aren't that many examples where I mean, the big studios are constantly trying to transfer their properties into games, and I don't know of too many big successes there. So
No, I can only think of a couple that have gone the other way. I mean, the Resident Evil franchise,
yeah,
for
well,
instance.
I mean, that's
But it hasn't made it to the smaller screen, so,
Yeah.
no, that's a good question.
yeah. And that's all genre.
Yeah,
At
all
the end,
genre
this is,
stuff,
so, yeah.
absolutely. Yes?
You've been talking a lot about these sort of serial authorship, those shows that are sort of running on the AMC, but I was curious, internationally, what would be considered the great episodic show that transferred so quickly, like sort of whether it's in the procedural area or whether it's comedies that are episodic, that make that true.
So his question was, what's the great episodic show that translates internationally?
I think it's CSI, isn't it?
CSI. Well, I mean,
CSI New York,
it's-
CSI Miami.
Well, New York, not so much.
Oh, really?
It's actually the number one show currently, which is also a big challenge internationally, was House. NCIS is very successful, Criminal Minds, and strangely CSI Miami. That's actually by
It's the glasses.
Yeah, it's not. It's the Miami setting and the look. I mean, CSI New York is a little bit off. CSI Miami tends to be the more successful one, or Hawaii 5.0 or something like that. So big glossy, big budgets type of things. Mentalist is also quite successful because of the charming thing. So it's all like, say, things that also work in the States, but not all of them. For example, Law and Order isn't such a big success internationally because it's a little bit too normal, dull. It doesn't have.
Well, the Law and Order that does the best internationally is SVU. That's the that's the one we always had the most success with, because it's I guess it's got that edge to it that people tune into a little bit more as opposed to just I guess that's what it is, but it's SVU that does it more than the others. for sure. And from Canada, Flashpoint always, Rookie Blue. I mean, those are perpetual, great international shows out of this country that have played across multiple platforms and always bring, almost all the time, most territories bring a strong audience.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question if we have one. Anybody? Yes.
In the realm of episodic, is there an appetite for more people looking for things beyond the cop, hospital, or paramedic thing with the success of things like Glee? Or I know ABC's putting out a comedy about aliens in a gated community this fall. Is it expanding? And how far can that go?
Okay, the question was, is the appetite for episodic storytelling expanding beyond the sort of recognized parameters of doctor, lawyer, cop? And how far can that go? Is it expanding to other things?
We always had a joke about where could you place Grey's Anatomy next, and that was always our, okay, put here and put there. I mean, I think there's always going to be procedural. I think it's always going to have a home. I think that the quirky detective type show continues to be something that is generally quite popular, ultimately. Yeah. I'm really curious how Elementary is going to do, because Elementary is, in my mind, less Sherlock Holmes and more The Mentalist. I think there's always going to be a place for those. When you start to, audiences around the world really interact with that kind of thing. It's something that, the general member of the public wants to go home. In every country in the world, there's a percentage of TV viewers who want to go home and they want to turn on the TV and they want to see something that they can just interact with. And so I think probably police procedurals of all of them is the one that's going to go. Having a quirky detective or a quirky problem solver of some sort is always going to work out well. Whether or not the workplace drama with a sort of racy romantic backdrop is going to continue until they run out of things, I don't know. That's the Grey's Anatomy one, I suppose. But the thing about the success of Glee and other things is that you still are looking at something that is a little bit outside of that box, and so it won't work in the most general way for every platform. The way that some of the examples I just gave you are. I don't know if you guys have anything.
Yeah, I mean, Glee, to be honest, is recognized, and it has a certain success, but it's by far more niche than any of the procedural show. I wouldn't, because like whatever, NCIS may have 20% market share, Glee has 2%. So it's really far off. So it's probably not because people don't have fantasy, but it's just like you can relate to a cop story, you can relate to a medical story without knowing the exact background. As soon as you, for example, move in the courtroom, it already gets a little bit more tricky. Lawyers, depending. If it's simple, if it gets into the details, then and unfortunately, these are the typical settings. I mean, there aren't. I mean. As soon if you're talking about the gates or something like that, it might have a certain audience, but that's already niche genres, so it's not like the big blockbuster episodic setting.
At the same time, the broadcasters are always telling us they're looking for something fresh and new. So,
yeah, they might with a lisp who's telepathic. That's all I mean.
Just stick to those basic things.
But I think there are channels out there that, and I know this wasn't part of your question, but there are channels out there that, by definition, are looking for something different, and that's where you place those shows. But yeah, Cop with fairy wings and telepathy, I think, is right up there.
So really, it's an important part to just do your research as to what who your potential customer is going to be.
Well, yeah, but absolutely, like, be obsessed with what broadcasters are looking for. Know that inside and out. That's absolutely essential to your success. But also know that sometimes, depending on the broadcaster, they may be open to the idea that they don't know what they want until you show them.
Yeah.
So there is the odd pitch that can come in and just make you kind of go, wow, who'd have thunk, So don't be afraid to swing for the fences, but don't just swing for the fences.
I think that was a wonderful note of closure. Thank you, Marguerite. Thank you to all my panelists. Thank you again to the CMF and the Strategic Partners.